excited that you joined us. You know, those of you who raised your hand said I'm here for the first time. My assumption is that means the rest of you, this is not your first time, and you came back, which means you saw value in it, and that's super exciting to us as well. Thank you for carving out the time, lining up whatever childcare you needed, and making it a priority to learn and grow with us. Something that has kind of become a mantra for us at this event is that we don't love leadership, but we love redemption, and redemption at high levels takes great leaders. We don't love leadership, we love redemption, and redemption takes great leaders. And right off the bat, we're going to jump into this for redemption's sake, right? That's what we're doing. And I need to give credit where credit is due. As Steph mentioned, the heart of this content came from a blog by Dan Ryland from 12 Stone Church. We've been partnered with 12 Stone Church for a long time. Dan is a good friend of mine, and I know it is ironic at the very least that when we're talking about the topic of creativity, I'm using a lesson that didn't fully originate with me. That seems ironic, but the information was so poignant that I thought, man, this is worth sharing, and I've got quite a few thoughts of my own inserted here, but Dan gets all the creative credit for these top 6 practices we're going to look at to improve your leadership creativity. And as Steph mentioned, a lot of us don't think that we have leadership creativity. We might think we have leadership. We might think we have creativity. We usually don't think that we have both. But no, those two words are not oxymoronic. You know, an oxymoron is when you take two opposite turns and you shove them together, like jumbo shrimp, right? Like deafening silence, or like Microsoft Works. I just think that's interesting that they put that together. Now you know I'm a Mac guy, so there you go. But that's how a lot of people feel about these two terms, leadership, creativity. How could those things go together? Because I have my picture of leadership in my head. I have my picture of creativity in my head, and these two things, they never meet. And leadership is important, and it is valuable, but it's actually often seen as the opposite of creativity. In fact, particularly in the church, we often draw a line of demarcation that does not actually exist between our leaders and our creatives. When we think about our creatives, we equate the term creative with the term artist. If we're going to be creative, we have to unleash the artists in our midst. And so we get this picture in our head of what this creative artist looks like. I don't know what pops in your head when you think about creative artists, but let me give you some examples of things that might pop into your head. Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, okay? Michelangelo's David, Statue of David, Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, or, you know, the obvious one, Will Ferrell's interpretation in Elf, pure art.
I'm in a store and I'm singing. I'm in a store and I'm singing.
Hey! There's no singing in the North Pole.
Yes, there is.
No, it's not.
We sing all the time.
No, it's not.
Especially when we make toys.
That is pure art, right? But art doesn't just look like art either. What about Mark Zuckerberg, right? You can hate Facebook, but he created something incredibly powerful and incredibly creative that's connected us in a way we've never been connected before. How about Abraham Lincoln? Artist? Nope. Creative? Yes. Leader? Absolutely. Here's my point. Creativity isn't limited to those who are artists. It is not the private domain of those who are musical or can paint like Tara is doing up here for us throughout the worship today. If you've ever made a claim about yourself, well, the way I'm wired, I'm not creative, simply because you're not artistic, think again. Because great leaders are capable of great creativity, and creativity is not a gift reserved for just a few genius types. You can be a great leader and you can be creative. So what is creativity? Well, look at these definitions. Creativity is the state or quality of being creative. That one's pretty, like, duh. But it goes on, it says, the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, methods, interpretations, etc. It's the process by which one utilizes creative ability. Every single person can do this. But here's what you need to understand. This is what's key. Creativity is the ability to transcend traditional ideas. Okay? Leaders have to tap into creativity every single day in order to solve problems, in order to think in new ways, in order to develop the people around them to be better staffed or volunteers than they've ever had before, and ultimately to innovate towards a better future. And for those of us who have been tasked as volunteers or staff with leading for the kingdom, listen, creativity can be our way to unpack people's preconceived notions about who Jesus Christ is, to proclaim the unchanging message of Jesus Christ. Creativity is one of the greatest tools of the gospel presentation that we have ever been given. And you know what? It used to be almost exclusively the domain of the church. Sadly, the church is often the last thing you think of when you think of creativity. But heed this warning from Dan Reiland. He says, creativity isn't about being clever, it's about making things clear. Creativity is all about creating those aha moments, there's power in those moments where it's like the scales fall off your eyes. Creativity is about helping people see something clearly that for whatever reason they were unable to see before. And clarity is the leading edge of creativity. Clarity is important because if people don't understand something, they cannot support it, they will not believe it, they will not get behind it. You cannot put your faith in a Jesus you do not understand. Creativity is a way to unlock Jesus in the kingdom. And if people don't understand you, they will not follow you to him. And if there's one thing that's important in the church, is getting people to believe the life-changing truth about Jesus Christ. And creativity is a great tool to do it. Now, it is also a great tool to succeed in the business realm, to lead your kids. You know, it's a great tool across the board, but obviously we're pretty invested in how that plays out within the local church community, within the body of Christ. As we spread out, we want to be creative. But I want you to note this. Creativity doesn't necessarily mean anything goes. Creativity doesn't necessarily mean anything goes. Creativity isn't all about bucking the system. It isn't all about breaking the rules. And sometimes creative leaders do this, don't they? They push the envelope until they cross the line. You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes a creative leader does this, but not as often as I think we romanticize it. We just think of creative leaders as always these mavericks that are just, you know, taking new territory or doing crazy things. And sometimes that's true. But some of the greatest creativity in business and ministry and life comes through systems, teamwork, and collaboration. What? Creativity through systems? How could that happen? If you want to be effective on any scale, it requires tremendous creativity to make it all work together. So we say we don't love leadership, but we love redemption. Here's what we actually mean by that. If you want to continue reaching more people, seeing more lives change, you want to be effective in the things that you lead, that requires creative leadership. And I love this statement from Dan Reiland. He says, without execution, leaders aren't creative, they're merely dreamers. So many creative people have so many great ideas that never become anything because they can't put any legs under it. Without execution, leaders aren't creative, they're merely dreamers. Creativity takes execution, not just dreaming, and execution takes great leadership. So creative leaders actually embrace productive routines. Isn't that opposite of what you think about creatives? Creative leaders actually embrace productive routines. And don't confuse that with being stuck in a rut. When you're stuck in a rut, the key word is you're stuck. You're not going anywhere. Routine isn't being stuck, it's moving forward, it's just doing it on purpose. So, for instance, a good exercise routine helps you stay strong and fit and healthy. A good study routine enables you to learn new things. Good routines are actually all about progress, which leads us to our list of practices. So, these are the practices that will actually help you become a more creative leader, okay? Number one, cultivate your curiosity. You've got to feed your curiosity. How many of you consider yourself to be naturally curious? Raise your hand. You just are inquisitive. How many of you just don't care about that stuff at all, right? I don't care how it works, just as long as it works. If you're naturally inquisitive, you do have a little bit of an advantage here, okay? But the desire to learn and to grow actually increases the potential for creative leadership. So if you desire to be a creative leader at all, you got to grow. And if that's not natural to you, don't worry. It's not natural to a lot of people in this room, and it can be learned. But here's where it gets dangerous. Creative or not, how many of you like things the way they are? And let me say it differently. How many of you enjoy comfort? I mean, let's be honest, right? We live in a culture addicted to comfort. Comfortable is a natural human desire, but did you know that comfortable is often the enemy of creative leadership? If this is you, don't worry. You picked the right church. We'll make you uncomfortable all of the time. We won't let you off the hook, and so don't let yourself off the hook either. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you're not comfortable with that type of stuff that you're not creative. That's not what it means at all. It doesn't mean you're incapable of creativity in any way. In fact, more often than not, a desire for comfort isn't a sign that you lack creativity. It's a sign that you lack margins. I'm going to say that again because you need to hear it. A desire for comfort isn't a sign you lack creativity, but that you lack margin. A desire for comfort, when you are just overwhelmed with, I just can't get to the end of the day when I can put my pajamas on and my slippers and just do all that, binge watch Netflix, it tends to indicate that you're under a lot of pressure. And by the way, in the world that we live in, who isn't? But it tends to indicate that you're not living with enough margin in your life to be curious. You know why kids are curious? They have nothing to do. That's why we lose our curiosity. But according to the scripture that I read, we're supposed to be like a little child, which should include being insatiably curious. But the problem is we have a lack of curiosity in life because we don't have enough margin to have it. And what you end up finding is that you're going through all the motions as a leader, in your job, in your volunteer role, in parenting, in your ministry. You're just like going through the days and you're like, it's Friday, what happened? And you're just kind of on cruise control. So if you find yourself getting burned out easily, recent story of a volunteer, love this person, really, really wonderful, but who was like, I got to take a break from the nursery, which I get because it's the nursery, right? But it's 1 hour a week for a month, every other month. So at most, it's 26 hours a year. If 26 hours of anything burns you out, we've got significant margin issues in our life, right? And so if you find yourself getting burned out by volunteering in the nursery or guest services or whatever the case may be, don't quit. The problem is likely not where you're serving, it's that you're serving with no curiosity. Fight for some margin in your life and in your leadership. Identify all the things you said yes to and say no to some of them so you can leave yourself enough room to be curious. Man, if you go into the nursery curious, it's a hoot, right? And a great way to do this is just in whatever setting you're in, ask a lot of questions. Push yourself to ask new and different questions with the goal of seeing new and different things in new and different and creative ways. We got to cultivate that curiosity, and the best way to do it, create margin. Number two, Meet new and different people. Now, this is one that we tend to like to blame on everyone else, okay? We blame our neighbors because they keep to themselves. They just always drive in and put the garage door down, and they don't want to be our friend, you know? Until you meet them and you're like, I've been meaning to come over here forever, you know? But we blame our neighbors for keeping to themselves. We blame our kids for making our schedules crazy. Well, I would meet more people, I would do more things, and we would go on date night and do all those types of things, but oh, my kids, their schedules are just nuts. Forgetting that we're the parents who decide those schedules, you know? We blame our church for not being friendly enough. Oh, it's so big and sometimes gets impersonal, and they don't do that greeting time where it's like, shake hands, and so I can't make friends at church, and so we blame the church. Meanwhile, we've never signed up for a community group. We've never chosen to disciple anyone. We've never volunteered in a ministry in the church. We've never invited our neighbors over, not even one time. But it's everybody's fault. We default to comfort, remember? Same pattern every day, same conversation, same thing every night. Supper, binge watch Netflix, go to bed. How many of you have done that at least 3 times this week? Yes, right? It's very surprising how small your world can get if you let it. You're living on a planet with 7.2 billion people, and our country is overwhelmed with loneliness. It's amazing how small our world we can get if we let it. And the smaller the world, the smaller the leadership capacity, the smaller the influence, the less chance for creativity. Your weeks can become filled with the exact same people, the exact same things, over and over and over on repeat. It's safe, but it's not creative. It's not very much fun. Part of being a great leader is shepherding those relationships. But if you rarely meet anyone different than you, your creativity will begin to shrink. So you need to make it a literal goal to meet a couple of people every month that are different than you, who just think differently, who value different things. And when you find those individuals, take them to coffee, get to know them, learn about what they do and how they think and what makes them tick. You may find that there's some stuff about them that's different that isn't bad. Now, sure, you adamantly disagree on certain things. You may even reject some of their values and their ways of thinking, and that's okay. But almost always you will come away refreshed and, more importantly, engaged and enlarged as a leader, which is guaranteed to boost your leadership creativity. It's really, really hard to do the same thing over and over and be creative. The problem is we get stuck in a mindset. Jenny Catron wrote a book called, I'm going to forget the book now. Anyway, it's good. It's on the heart, soul, mind, and strength of leadership. What does it mean to lead out of the heart, soul, mind, and strength? And in that book, she unpacks something called the principle of 4. The principle of the number 4, okay? And simply stated, the principle of 4 says this: when you are trying to accomplish anything, you have to first determine the outcome that you're going for. What are we trying to do here? So let's assign to that outcome the number 4. We are trying to get to 4, okay? That's where we're trying to get. How do you get to that outcome? Some people might say 2 plus 2, duh. And you would be right. But are you exclusively right? What about 2 times 2? What about 10 minus 6? What about 3 plus 1 and 4 plus 0? There are a lot of ways to get to 4, but what Catron claims is that our problem comes not when we insist on the outcome. Our problem comes when we insist that there's only one way to get there. It's my way. You do it my way. That's the only way to do it right. When people say they're not doing it right, what they're usually saying is they're not doing it my way. And that's usually driven by fear, because what if they do it a different way and it's better? And the principle of 4 says there's a lot of ways to get there. And so meeting with new and different people is a great reminder. There are a lot of creative ways to get to your desired leadership outcome, and that realization will allow you to engage our next suggestion. Number 3, experiment with fresh ideas and try new things. How many of you are adventurous eaters? There's my people, all right? How many of you order the same thing everywhere, every time that you go to that restaurant? It's the same thing, right? How many of you do it so much that when you go into those places, they're like, number 6? They just know. They don't even know your name. They think your name is number 6, right? You know what I'm saying? I was adopted, and my adopted mom was Japanese. And as you can imagine, I tried a lot of unique foods. I've been eating sushi and using chopsticks since I was a toddler. And the result is, I'm a guy who's willing to try strange things, because when you come in one hot summer afternoon and your dad is eating dried squid jerky and offers you some, it's all uphill from there, right? It's all uphill from that moment. And so you're looking at a guy who I will eat raw fish. I will try peanut butter and jelly hot wings. I'm totally down trying a donut with bacon on it, because why not? You never know. You never know. We had our community group the other night. Somebody brought white chicken chili. Somebody brought red chili. They were both delicious. I thought, mix them together, so good. It was so good, you know. Now, I have friends, I have relatives, not as adventurous. So when I suggest that we try something new or go to a certain place, they look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why would you ingest that into a human body? Why would I ever do that? And my thought is, why not? Leadership is this way. Leadership often becomes more of the same old thing. We know the most inspirational leaders are also the most innovative leaders, and yet some of us keep doing the same thing, expecting new results. That's not leadership. It's not creativity. It's actually insanity. It's actually insanity. And it is easy to resist that which is different just because it's different. In fact, there's a classic line that gets attributed to the body of Christ. We've never done it that way. How do you all know that? Should that not be depressing, that in the church that used to be the bastion, the centerpiece of creativity in our civilization, we're known for the line, we've never done it that way? Sometimes that's exactly the reason you should. New ideas, innovative methods are not only good, they're necessary. Now, we're the Church of Jesus Christ. The message is unchanging. We stand on biblical truth, and that we never compromise on that. But the methods are not only, changing methods is not only good, it's necessary. It's true. You can't and shouldn't do every new idea that you come up with. You want to know why? Because a lot of them are terrible. Like awful ideas, but in the midst, as you mingle through all those terrible ideas, there's like this golden nugget that comes. You make a long list you want to try, and you pick one. Don't commit to it forever. This is what we're doing from now on. Try it, see if it works. If it doesn't, you learn something. And when you start to mix it up like this, leadership becomes fun again, and creativity starts to soar in the midst of a culture of permission. Number 4. Don't settle for status quo. And I might go further to say don't settle ever. You know, we talked earlier about the danger of getting in a rut. Well, status quo is the ugly cousin of getting in a rut, okay? Ruts are a result of being overbusy and underproductive. And FYI, just because you're overbusy doesn't mean you're productive. Doesn't mean you're productive, doesn't mean you're leading, and it certainly doesn't mean you're creating, okay? You're just busy. And for Christian leaders, it's challenging to lead in today's culture because not only is everyone else busier than they've ever been, and you are the one asking them to, for free, volunteer for something hard. How are you supposed to do that? But in the marketplace, the very foundations of biblical thinking and values are being tested at every turn. So the temptation is to not even ask, just to play it safe, to hold down to fort, to keep the status quo. But you're not moving forward. But at least you're not moving backward, right? That's the mentality. But listen, if we're honest with ourselves, deep down, no leader, no one who's called to lead anything longs for business as usual. That's not what we're striving for. There are creative juices flowing in you that God has placed in you, and He created us in His image. And I don't know if you know this about God. He's incredibly creative. If you don't believe me, look in the mirror. We don't look alike, right? We don't think alike. We don't act alike. And His desire is that we take all that difference and bring it together. Simply because He's just infinitely creative. Like, let's just see what happens. This is going to be so great. God is incredibly creative, and He put creativity in you to help you lead, to help you do what He called you to do. I talk to church leaders all the time, and they constantly complain about how they are chronically short on volunteers who are full of excuses why they can't volunteer. And by the way, Ransom is not immune to that. At any given time, we need probably 150 more volunteers than we have. So, we're just chronically, and I talk to leaders all the time, and they talk about the stories, and the people that can't say they can't volunteer are always full of excuses, but the leaders are also full of excuses of why they can't get people. They're all too busy. They say no, here's the reality. Everyone who chooses not to work for you, to volunteer for you, whatever the case may be, everyone who chooses not to come to your training, your meeting, they're somewhere else. Which means they chose something else, which means someone else set the table better than you did. You just got out-recruited. Yes, certainly. There are people who, no matter what you do, they're just going to bail. That's not on you. That's not what I'm talking about. But no one gives up comfort for status quo. No one gives up comfort to be part of something okay. They give up comfort for calling. You never inspire people to serve week in and week out if you aren't constantly reminding them of the bigger picture. Don't settle for status quo in your work or with your teams or with volunteers or even in your family. Inspire them to something bigger. Because the reality is you just got out-recruited. Because you took the gospel of Jesus Christ and you somehow made it status quo. We've got to set the table better. We've got to set the table better. Number 5, play chess, not checkers. You play chess and you play checkers on the exact same game board. And that, coincidentally, is where the similarities end. Checkers is a game that you can play with little kids, and even if they play it wrong, they might still beat you. Right? You can't go backwards because backwards is okay. There's not a whole lot of strategy. Maybe you're thinking 1 or 2 moves ahead. If you have the ability, the capacity, if you're playing like a child, and you have the capacity to think 1 to 2 moves ahead, you are basically the checkers champion, right? But in chess masters have strategies. They have game plans. They're anticipating multiple moves ahead. They're trying to get into the mindset of their opponents. Leadership is definitely more like chess than it is like checkers. And leaders who determine to develop creativity inside them actually develop a distinct advantage because it takes creativity to think those moves ahead. The problem is most people lead like they're playing checkers. Your ability to think ahead, to anticipate what comes around the corner, to get out in front doesn't come naturally. And let me just give you a common example, because it's not always big things. Like, the greatest person you're leading is yourself, right? So when you get to a certain point and you're dealing with chronic health issues, let's say, you will look back and go, all the times I didn't sleep enough, eat healthy, exercise, you start going, it matters today. What you do today will affect years from now, right? And we got to have a longer term perspective, and that's definitely true in leadership. Okay? And it can be practiced, it can be developed. This usually is done best in a team. How often do you gather those together that you're leading and invest focus time and focus energy on what's coming, rather than just focus time and focus energy on responding to life as it comes? How often do you talk to your leaders about, here's what we're dreaming about, rather than just here's what we're doing, here's what we have to do today? How often do you lead proactively rather than reactively? Because you'll never get to the creative edge of what's next for your business or your ministry or whatever if you're spending all your time on what's now. Let me say that again. You'll never get to the creative edge of what's next if you're spending all your time on what's now. And the way that our culture is built, we live based on the last 5 minutes and the 5 minutes that's to come and the moment we're standing in. And we react to everything. You can't ignore the reality of what's happening here and now. That's true. But without making time to get out in front, without making time to dream, you will lose your creative edge. So contrary to popular opinion, creativity rarely happens in the moment. Not a lot of people know this about some of you do, but anybody ever been at the Ransom, and whether I'm speaking or someone else, the sermon convicted you or the worship was powerful in a way you're like, man, the Holy Spirit was moving, right? Do you know those messages are written 3 months ago? And we've been spending 3 months praying over and planning and being creative and putting pieces to so everything. Creativity doesn't just happen. You plan for it. Number 6, take smart risks and embrace change. Take smart risks and embrace change. I love this quote from the blog. Dan Ryland said, it's not possible to make progress and simultaneously avoid risk and change. It's not possible to make progress while simultaneously avoiding risk and change. Most leaders say that they embrace change and take risks, but truthfully, that's not the case because change is tough, it's exhausting, it can even be scary, but without it, you don't move forward. And so I use the term smart risk. Smart risk requires prayer, wisdom, and conviction. You don't have to and shouldn't bet the farm every week on everything, but what one risk are you taking right now in your leadership that requires both faith and creative leadership wisdom? And so SMART is an acronym. You've maybe heard it before. S stands for specific. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Don't be general. Put numbers to it so you can actually know when you fail. What's measurable? How can you measure whether you achieved your goal? A is attainable. What's outside your comfort zone but not outside reality. R is relevant. Do the goals matter not just in general but to you? Because if they don't matter to you, you're not going to chase them. And T, this is the one we fail at, time-bound. It's not just about what you will do, when will you do it? How do you know when something's late? How do you know when something's overdue? How do you know when you didn't get it done? Bottom line, you can be creative, you must be creative. So we want to challenge you to give these practices a try, see if they don't improve your creativity. This matters because redemption takes creative leaders. God put creativity in you, and you honor him when you develop it. You use it with your family or at your work or even in church. Because part of unleashing creativity in yourself is becoming all that God made you to be. So here's what we're going to do. We got about 12 minutes until we're going to take a break. Steph will come up to let you know when the break is coming. I want you to get with 2 or 3 people sitting right around you. Don't move too far because you don't have time. And they're going to put 4 questions on the screen for group discussion. And here's why the group discussion is important. Don't just sit there. Because depth is not defined by content. It's defined by what you do with the content. Right? You can talk about these great ideas all day long. If you don't own it, you'll never go deep. So get in a group for about 12 minutes. The lights are going to come up a little bit, and we'll discuss, and then Steph will give us instructions for our break and then our next session.